Hello, and welcome to this edition of Neighbor to Neighbor, broadcast from the beautiful campus at Monmouth University. My name is Paul Brown. On today's show, I'll be speaking with Congressman Frank Pallone about two issues which impact so many of us here in New Jersey, their health care and the environment. Then we'll sit down with Tony MacDonald from Monmouth University's Urban Coastal Institute and take a look at some of the coastal challenges facing New Jersey. So let's get started. Well, welcome, Congressman Frank Pallone. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
It's really good seeing you again, and thank you particularly for being my first guest on today's show.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm glad to be here.
A couple initial questions might be helpful for our audience. I know you were born and raised right here, Long Branch, New Jersey, still reside here. I'd love to hear your impressions of Long Branch from your days here to right now.
Well, it's changed a lot, Paul. I mean, I think it's changed a lot in terms of the, ethnic breakdown of the community. A lot of new people have come in over the years. I was thinking about when I was in high school, because I went to all the Long Branch public schools, and I was thinking that when I was in Long Branch High School and I graduated in 1969, I think we only had about a handful of Hispanic students, whereas now the majority of the school, or close to a majority, is Hispanic. But in terms of what it's like to live in Long Branch, I mean, it always was and still is about being at the shore and enjoying the ocean and the beach. And it's still, even though most people live here year-round, you still have a huge influx of summer people. So, and in the same way, I think a lot of students are attracted to Monmouth University because of the shore and the ocean as well. So some things have changed, other things have been the same, but it's certainly a great place to grow up and to live.
Oh, that's great. It's particularly exciting. The ocean will always be here. As Long Branch changes, the ocean will always be here.
Exactly.
I'd also be curious to know, you then obviously went off to college. We were just talking about our children off to college, but where'd you go to college, and what'd you study, and how'd you find your passion?
Well, I was interested. I had a teacher at Long Branch High School. Her name was Miss Shepard, who taught foreign languages, particularly French. And she got me interested in Middlebury College in Vermont, which was then, not as much today, but then was certainly known, mostly for languages. And so I went up there one day, and I really liked it. So I went to Middlebury College in Vermont. And you might say, gee, Vermont is so different from the Jersey Shore. But in many ways, there were a lot of similarities because I was always concerned about the environment. And I guess growing up in Long Branch, environment and protecting the ocean was always a major issue. And so when I went to Middlebury College, I got very much involved in the environmental movement then. In the spring of 1970 was the first Earth Day, and I organized the first Earth Day at college.
Wow, that's great. Well, is that where you got your passion for public service?
Well, I always was interested. I believe it or not, when I was in 4th grade at the Broadway School, which is now the administration building on Broadway in Long Branch, I remember one day coming in, and the teacher, her name was Mrs. Mannheimer, said, okay, we're going to elect student representatives today. And I was like, oh, what's that? That's interesting. She said, well, we're going to elect the person who's going to represent the class. And I got all excited, and I ran for, 4th grade student representative and won. And in many ways, I think it's been, uphill or downhill ever since. That was sort of ignited my passion at a young age.
Well, isn't it fun that you can remember Mrs. Mannheimer and Miss Shepard?
Oh, they were just outstanding teachers. They really were.
Doesn't it say how important it is from those early stages in our K through 12 system? We obviously feel that when we have the students here.
Definitely.
The benefit of all that. So the bug with public service then took you also to be able to align what your passions were. You've mentioned environment.
Oh, yeah.
You should know how wonderfully we equate you as a person, but also in terms of what you've done with environmental issues, tremendously
Well,
Is
you
that
at
where that
Monmouth
came
now
from?
have that. Yeah, absolutely. But you have this great program also now that relates to the oceans and oceans management, which it seems to continue to grow, and I think is an asset to the school as well.
Oh, we do. We have a lot of programs generally related to the environment, and often they center around particular institutes like the Urban Coastal Institute. So that interest in terms of environment, do you tie that also to your tremendous interest in healthcare? Do you
Absolutely.
see, I'd love to hear how you, in your mind, tie the two together.
Well, what happened is when you get elected to Congress, you try to gravitate towards certain committees, and oftentimes it's whatever your passion is. And so I very quickly became a member initially of what we call the Natural Resources Committee that had jurisdiction over all the ocean and fisheries issues. And then after a couple of years, I got on the committee called Energy and Commerce that has jurisdiction over Superfund and toxic waste and that type of thing. But it also has jurisdiction over healthcare and telecommunications and energy. And so I did gravitate towards healthcare because I think in many cases I look at the healthcare issue from an environmental, health safety point of view. And it was a natural bridge to get to that. And I guess more than anything else, those areas, in my opinion, are the ones where I feel I can impact, not only the area and the state, but even the country, because they're so important in terms of our daily lives. So,
Well, you're absolutely right, and talk about two issues that have immediate impact, regional impact, national impact, and international
exactly.
impact. The environmental, for many of us here, right here in wonderful Jersey Shore, we always are pausing, thinking back to Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
You actually can see and feel the resiliency, but I always worry as to those that aren't there yet.
Right.
What are some impressions you have a year later now, the successes we're making, the right paths to make some decisions?
Sure. Well, I think, Paul, the most important thing, I think, is that, over the long term, is that we need to recognize that because of global climate change, that these storms are going to be more frequent. I mean, I know there are those that deny that, and I think that's a little absurd, so I'm not going to get into it. But we have to sort of prepare for the future. I mean, I can talk about what's happened the last year, but I think the most important thing is to think in terms of, what happens in the future in preparing for these storms, and what can we do nationally and internationally to try to address the issue of global climate change. But in terms of the last year, I mean, there have been good and bad things. A lot of people still are not in their homes. A lot of businesses are not back. Although I've worked very hard, I feel like I'm a bureaucrat sometimes in trying to get money out to people. A lot of people still haven't gotten their claims or received money to help rebuild. And so it's a process that's going to be going on for a while. And, at the same time, we're trying to get funding out to people so they can restore or rebuild. We need to be conscious of the fact that over the long term, things do have to change. That's why people are being asked to elevate their homes. And we're trying to have a little more planning for the future, anticipating the possibility of future storms.
Well, it is a moment that we all think about, and I think we think about the immediacy and the midterm and long term.
Yeah.
Were you able to be here on campus? As you might be aware, we were really felt very fortunate to be able to help the area with, we worked obviously with the state and county sheriff's office, but we used our multi-activity center, our MAC as we refer to it, to help with those immediate needs. Were you here on campus?
Oh, absolutely, and it was, the response here was wonderful. As you know, I don't remember all the details. I mean, I was here almost every day for a long time, but we had in the immediate aftermath, shelters were set up in various towns. There was one in Long Branch at the middle school. I mean, I'll run through almost every town had one. But they couldn't accommodate it. So very quickly, I don't know if it was literally the next day, it may have been, Paul Gaffney, who's your predecessor, opened up the gym or the multi-purpose center so that we could get the overflow or, have more spaces. I think you might have had 1,000 people here at one time.
Yes. More.
And maybe even more. And it was great. And I particularly remember the like health center. I don't know what it was called, but it was sort of like a makeshift clinic that was set up there by the Red Cross or whatever. And that was the place that was, in many ways, the most memorable to me, because you had people that, that had major health concerns that were accommodated there. But you guys did a great job, and people will not forget it.
Well, we absolutely know it was the right thing to do, and we'll do it again. We just hope we don't have to.
I know. But realistically, we'd like to think that this isn't going to happen again, but unfortunately, it's very likely that it will.
And what's interesting to pick up on that point, that has to be factored into the planning, it seems to me, for the long-term decision-making. Do you have a sense that we are getting there, to not just view this as one-time thinking? Oh,
I think so, yeah. I mean, I mentioned those who deny climate change, but I think those are mostly in Washington, not so much here. I think that there's a lot of, very much a consciousness of that. An example would be, close by would be Seabright. The mayor of Seabright, Dina Long, who I respect a lot, the way she handled the aftermath of the storm, not only in trying to deal with the humanitarian concerns, in the immediate aftermath, but trying to plan for the community for the future, and looking at, long-term plans about, what we've done with the businesses. So I think there's a lot of that going on. I mean, it's hard to assess, how effective it's going to be in the long run, but I think people are looking towards the future.
I can't help but to pick up on a comment you made. We are sitting here in the beautiful Monmouth University campus in Long Branch, New Jersey, which isn't in Washington, but not so far from here where your day job is. Do you think the mindset in Washington is to try to affect change? And I would ask that question not only in the context of this particular topic, but all that we've seen to go through with I would not say is leaving a good impression in terms of effectiveness of government.
The problem is there's a real clash in Washington now, and it's become extremely partisan. And I'm trying not to be terribly partisan today, but I worry about the ideologues, particularly the Tea Party ideologues, who, really don't believe that government has much of a role in much of this. The Tea Party, believes that we shouldn't have an environmental protection agency, we shouldn't have a Department of Education. And I try to get away from that ideological clash and just look at things practically, because I think that what happens if ideology takes precedence, then it's very hard to get things done. If you say, okay, the federal government shouldn't get involved in healthcare, the federal government shouldn't get involved in education, shouldn't get involved in environmental protection, then it's very difficult to come to any kind of conclusion in a practical sense to deal with something like climate change or, national health insurance or something of that nature. And I've always tried to stay away from that. I mean, I consider myself a liberal Democrat. I think most people would categorize me that way. But I try not to be ideological, and that's the danger. And we really are kind of at a standstill now, because there are too many people, I think, who really don't want to compromise in order to get things done. And that's a major problem.
Why do you think that's, why is that the case now?
Because I think when I started out, Paul, 25 years ago when I started out, there were Democrats and Republicans, there were liberals and the conservatives, but they still basically felt that for the most case, government had a role. But if you get into this ideology that say government shouldn't get involved in, let's say, environmental protection, then you just are not open to any kind of compromise because you don't think that that's the role of the government. So I think that's the biggest problem right now. I call it ideological. I don't know if that's the best term, but I think it's part of it. You could use it in education. I mean, if you say that there shouldn't be a Department of Education, which is what the Tea Party says, you could argue that the federal government can play some role, but if they don't think that there should even be a Department of Education, then it's difficult to talk about, a lot of the things that you'd probably like to see here.
You think, related to that, Obviously, there's ebbs and flows of when these conversations happen, particularly when you have presidential politics coming up in years ahead. Does the conversation change in years like this?
I think it's interesting you mention that, because I think that's in some sense part of the problem. I mean, if you think about the fact that we're still in, I believe, right? We're still in the first year of President Obama's 4-year term.
And we're talking
and
about,
yet there's
yes.
So much talk is about who's going to run for president next. And how do you, if all the focus is who's going to run for president, 3 years from now, or who's going to run for governor 3 years from now. I mean, you saw the same thing with the gubernatorial race just took place, right, in early November, and already everybody's, who's going to run for governor next? Well, what about who's going to govern, and who's going to actually do something, That's
true.
And it's almost, there's so much focus on the game of politics and not on actually what you're going to get done. And things need to be done. I mean, you think about our state, we still have high unemployment. Our unemployment is higher than almost any other state in the region. I mean, sure, the economy's growing nationally, but it's not growing fast enough. And I don't know who to blame in all this.
Sure.
But I'm just saying the atmosphere is not good for a number of reasons.
But, an observation, you're still extremely upbeat. You're still extremely upbeat. I would ask a final thought. Give encouragement to our students here on campus.
I want
might
to.
Emulate to be what you have done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, your students should understand that I believe very strongly that nothing has changed in terms of your ability to effectuate a change and get things done ultimately in Washington. And so, in the same way that I was always enthused about running for office, whether it was as a city councilman in Long Branch or a state senator or a U.S. congressman, there are just tremendous opportunities out there for young people, either to run for office or to work for the government, with an agency, or to be a lobbyist. I know some people give a bad connotation to lobbyists. I think lobbyists, for the most part, perform good functions. And I certainly want to encourage young people to get involved in government in any aspect, or even as a volunteer on a campaign, on the weekend or at night. We have interns in our office from Monmouth University. Whenever I run a campaign, we always try to get Monmouth University students involved in working on the campaigns, even if it's only for a few hours on a weekend. And so I would really encourage that, because I do really believe that if you really want to give back, and actually today is the anniversary of President Kennedy's 50th anniversary of his assassination, and I keep thinking about, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I still believe that young people get involved. It can make a difference, and I think you'll find it very fulfilling.
Well, that's a really nice, inspirational set of thoughts, and I particularly want to thank you for stopping your day and being with us here on Monmouth University's campus. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, I'd really like to welcome Tony MacDonald from the Urban Coastal Institute to our conversation this afternoon. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, President Brown. It's nice to be here.
I really have to start with just asking how you found your way to Monmouth University and to the directorship of our Urban Coastal Institute. I'd love to hear a bit about your background.
Great, appreciate it. It's really actually kind of a coming home for me, because I actually grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, which is northern Jersey, and my family always had a house in Avon, which is just south of here. So, and my dad still lives here. So it was really nice. I had worked in New York for my early career and worked a lot on issues that are still important to this region, including ocean dumping. And then I took a little detour. I was in Washington for 18 years, originally working for Mayor Koch. And then this opportunity came up. I had been doing mostly lobbying for Congress, and the opportunity came up you had just started up the Urban Coast Institute here at Monmouth, and they were looking for a director, and it really was a great opportunity for me. It fitted with my experience, and also a place that I love and knew from growing up.
I'm sure those 18 years in Washington have served you pretty well in this role here, too, given how we're so intricately involved with all the decisions that we have to be made in the broad area of Coastal Institute issues. A more immediate set of conversations I'd love to hear you talk about is obviously we're almost 1 year from Superstorm Sandy. How do you see the Urban Coastal Institute? What role did it play in the immediacy and then maybe in the longer term?
Well, it really, the thing about Sandy, it really reminded us that there was some work that we were already doing, and we were really fortunate to actually have been working with the communities already. We had gotten a small grant, actually, from the National Sea Grant Consortium to develop a kind of vulnerability analysis for communities to look at sea level rise and storm damage. And also kind of where we fit, the Urban Coast Institute fits in is the policy arena. So we really want to make sure that the communities have the best science to make the best policy decisions. So we had developed a getting to resilience kind of criteria for towns to do a self-analysis. So fortunately, we had some tools we had already developed. So after Sandy, we've stepped up a little bit, and actually we're doing more extensive outreach to communities. It also has meant that the Urban Coast Institute can work with the university at large. There's a lot going on at the university. You know better than I probably, because you're involved with all, but we work with the Kislak Real Estate Institute on development issues having to do with Sandy. We work with the Polling Institute, who's been doing, before this, had been working with the UCI to do some polling about people's views about coastal management. And increasingly, we're working with other departments as well. So what Sandy did is not only galvanize the UCI, but I think the university at large to really figure out ways that we can bring the expertise at the university out into the communities.
That's great. I also have a sense, as I think many of us do, we're torn with thinking the immediacy of how there's still many folks, individuals in the area that are struggling with a year later in terms of the devastation. But then we're also trying to learn, what does it say to us in the next year and the next year and the 10 years and the 30 years from now, and how many more Superstorm Sandys do we have to sustain? That whole area of long-term view of everything that's related to, particularly a little bias towards right here on the coast, why we're called the UCI.
Right.
What do you see, and what did we learn, and what do you see long-term here?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we're exactly trying to tee it up that way. As you know, in October, at the one-year anniversary, we had a major event where over 500 people here asking exactly that question, looking forward. What do we do? There's a lot of people responding right now to recovery, which is very challenging. But I do think we need to think of some issues about what do we do long term. We do significant beach nourishment along the Jersey Shore that the Corps of Engineers pay for. Can we pay for that into the long term? And is that going to be enough to protect our coastal communities? We found a lot as a result of Sandy that we really weren't ready for, particularly around Back Bay flooding issues. So how do we work with with communities on actually developing new ways of developing their property, or in some cases, we want the communities to be strong economically, but we might not be able to rebuild everywhere exactly the way we did in the past. So as we rebuild, we're looking at innovative ways where maybe communities could actually adopt some best practices that we can bring to the table from other regions of the country or other areas that have responded to storms. So I think that's some ways that we can look at that. And I also, frankly, think continuing education. I mean, we just continually can work with the students, actually, who have been very actively. You were up in Union Beach with some of the students doing some of the rebuilding work. And I think the more you get students involved in the community recovery, the more they'll be asking questions and learning things that they can apply in the future as well.
You mentioned particularly benchmarking. Every situation, I guess, to some degree is unique, but what did we learn here, and how have we benchmarked with other areas within the United States and the world from this particular storm, and what might be long-term issues we need to address?
Well, I think this was well known in the academic community and the research community that this is an area uniquely at risk because we have so much intense development on the coastlines. People knew that in the academic community, but you forget storm to storm. They haven't historically happened that often. But there's two big changes. One is I think the community from New York City on down recognizes how much is now at risk as a result of Sandy. And the other story, we'll debate climate change, what are the causes of climate change, but everybody knows that climate is changing regardless what the reasons are. And I do think there is a sense that storms might be more intense and more regular in the future. So I think there is an added degree of kind of diligence that hopefully we'll get as a result of the storm.
I guess we're trying to skirt a bit the climate change conversation, but I'd love to hear your views.
Well, again, there's a couple of things. I think there's absolutely no doubt that, in fact, humans have added, and the industrial development have added to CO2 in unprecedented levels. And that has had an impact on climate, and it's changing. The issue is over large expanses of time, is it the only factor? And that can continue to be discussed. But I think there is a consensus that there's going to be climate change. There is a consensus that there will be impacts. We have ocean acidification, which is happening because the pH level, the CO2, is impacting that. We have sea level rise. We have that historically, and we know we're going to have more. How much? We don't know exactly, but we know. We know, in fact, that all the scientists, or the majority of the scientists, predict more intense storms. So those are three things we know we have to adapt to. So from my perspective, I know that we can help communities understand better how they can adapt to those changes and hopefully take progressive action to mitigate them too. So how can we? It might not be everything, but what we have control over, we should take control over and try to take some actions.
Well, it makes me also think, and you said this several times, I do believe a sweet spot here at Monmouth is having applied research that our students can be engaged in. We have lots of institutes that help do that, and I believe UCI is one of those. I'd love to hear some examples of how our students have gotten their hands wet or dirty in projects.
Well, we've been very fortunate. We've gotten some funding from a variety of different sources, from EPA, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and also from some private donors and the Fairleigh Dickinson Jr. Foundation to build an infrastructure. So we've been able to buy some research vessels and some very sophisticated equipment to do monitoring of the waters, to do hydrographic surveying. So we have better data, and we're working with communities up in Shrewsbury River and Navesink River to actually do a storm surge model so that they can actually predict that. But you need the baseline data, and we can do that with our hydrographer. We have a wonderful marine scientist, Jim Nichols, who takes students out to do this work. So we're not only supporting the communities, but we're getting students involved in that. In addition, we have a whole network of water quality monitoring stations. Sometimes people, in good times, they forget that they actually have to monitor the science and keep a track record of what happened. If you don't know your current conditions, you can't respond properly. But fortunately, with this water quality monitoring stations, we can actually monitor the impacts of the storms on the water quality in different areas. And obviously in New Jersey, with beaches and how much that's important to the economy, we really need that information. And again, at the same time, we're teaching kids to use this equipment, so they're getting the technical skills as well as the science behind the research.
What would be an example of a finding for a layman that you can relate to in a water quality station that a student would have found and shared and celebrated in their research efforts?
Well, we found, for example, there was a time before you got here where actually some dolphins had come back into the back bay in the Navesink. So we're able to sort of track a little bit sort of what maybe the temperature was in the water. So how could you actually predict, and what was the reasons that some of the dolphins came into the estuaries. In addition, if you can map over time the changes in nutrient levels, that informs management decisions. So you can say, how do you actually control the input of nitrogen? A big issue in this state is nitrogen input into the waters, but you need to know what the baseline conditions are in order to know whether the actions you take are going to be effective. So that's why you need long-term monitoring. So we take that data, we then provide it to the communities, to New Jersey DEP. It goes into their data sets, and then they can choose different strategies to try to control the nutrients going into the waterways.
Sounds like an expensive proposition to me. Is there expensive instrumentation involved here, and vessels, and training, and background, and databases?
Well, databases, we can manage it. It's not expensive compared to the benefits that it generates. So we really significantly generate, when you look at what the coastal economy generates, it's certainly not an expensive investment. And actually scientists for a long time have been trying to argue, you need to invest in the science if you want to get the economic benefits. And they have been sometimes more successful than others. So definitely the payoff is there. Again, we've had, fortunately, these research grants that enable us to buy the vessels. Now that we have them, we are able to maintain them. We actually have a vessel account fund that we're actually trying to maintain that for the future so that we can replace the vessel eventually. Again, with the monitoring stations, they've been a little expensive. We're actually looking for corporate sponsors. So there are corporate sponsorship opportunities where we're looking. We've had at least one alumni who's adopted one of our water quality monitoring stations, and that helps significantly. But we're also continually looking for grant opportunities as well to help support the research work.
Tell me about one of these vessels. I mean, let's get detailed. What's the size of one of these vessels? And
well, again, that's why I have a marine scientist. I'm the lawyer on staff here, President Brown. But we have vessels actually, I think there's a 27-foot vessel that we have. And again, we have on it sophisticated hydrographic surveying, a side scan sonar that can map We actually used it in Sandy debris management. We've taken it out to actually help the state identify where some of the debris from Sandy is. We were a subcontractor to the state to work on that. And again, I will defer to Jim on the details of the technology. So I don't
Well, what's great about what you're describing is a student who comes here studying in any of the broad areas of marine biology, ecosystems, sustainability, environmental, broadly defined. We really have a set of programs, and obviously you need the talent and the expertise and actually the infrastructure to be able to pull it off. It sounds like that's where you might like to go. If you closed your eyes, where would you like to see the UCI go in terms of next projects, next activities?
Well, I see three different core areas of focus for us, although we're here to serve the community and serve the students. But we will continue, as a result of having this capacity now, we've developed a field methods course that Jim Nichols teaches. So increasingly we're developing not only supporting the other classes to take them out on research excursions, but also the actual field methods themselves. I'd like to see that increase, as well as increasing. We currently, with some funding, we have what's called the Heidi Lynn Sculthorpe Summer Research Grant Program. So we have a summer research program here, and we increasingly would like to attract more resources to do summer research using our equipment, as well as getting students out into the field. So I think that's an area, building, as I said, our niche on the research area is along the shoreline. I think that's great. But we're also doing, my background is ocean policy and planning. So we also have a major grant from NOAA to actually develop an ocean marine data portal. So in addition to the coastal issues, which are prominent and in the newspaper, we have things like proposals for offshore wind energy facilities. I just came from a meeting in New York with the port industry, and they're concerned about increased demands post-Panama Canal expansion for increased traffic. How do we manage all of these uses well into the future? So we also would like to continue to stay involved in ocean planning work. I'm very fortunate, thankfully, to you. You appointed former President Emeritus Gaffney as an Ocean Policy Fellow. So we're continuing to work with President Gaffney, and he was a member of the Ocean Commission, the U.S. Ocean Commission, to look at some of those ocean policy issues in the region. So that, I think, is an area for growth as well. And lastly is, as we started off on the Sandy, the community resilience. How do we continue to work with our local communities to develop resilience to storm, but also hazard to sustainable development? That's something that we have a minor, as you know, in global sustainability. So we also see that continuing role as well.
Yes. I can't help but say, Tony, I'm impressed by, in one set of words, you can make it very clear that the issues of the day we're addressing are as local, importantly, as our Shrewsbury River or close bays. They're as broad as the inner ocean. They're as broad as Panama, and they're as broad as world issues. I believe you tie it all seamlessly together in your mind.
I appreciate that. And actually, it was one of the reasons that attracted me here. I'd worked on a lot of national and international level policy issues in Washington. But the ability to stand on the shoreline and a place where it actually is happening day to day. And, you know, I like to say the ocean is the front door to the rest of the world.
Sure.
And so even though it's right here, it really is, I think, an opportunity for the students in the university to actually engage locally in ways that are nationally and hopefully in some cases even internationally significant.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for watching today's show. I hope you've learned as much as I did from our distinguished guests. Visit us again in the spring when we sit down with Governor Christine Todd Whitman to talk about her experience at Monmouth University's public servant in residence and important issues impacting many of us here in New Jersey. Thanks again for watching. I hope to see you at Monmouth University very soon.